Hello and welcome to Braver Leaders, the podcast. In this episode, I want to talk about our attention spans, because apparently they're shrinking. If that's the case, is that anything to be worried about? Is it good? Is it bad? And if it is bad, what can we do about it? To help unpack this potentially important finding, I'm going to quote from an article which was in Medical Express, January 2024, by Cyrus Moulton. The article is titled "Why Attention Spans Seem to be Shrinking and What We Can Do About It." I'll put a link to the article in the description. I'm not going to read all of the article at all. I'll just pick out a couple of things to help, I suppose, create a bit of discussion around, so we can just expand on what may be going on here and if it is important. Spoiler alert, I think it is important. Anyway, I'm going to quote from Professor Art Kramer, Professor of Psychology and the Director of the Centre for Cognitive and Brain Health at Northeastern University. He begins by talking about multitasking, saying that most of us think we're good at multitasking, but we're pretty terrible at it overall. Couldn't agree more. A lot of studies have shown that when people multitask, now there are exceptions, but when people multitask, they tend to take longer and their work is subpar compared to someone who just stuck with one thing and then had a break and maybe started again, or after a break to recover, maybe then did something else. And one of the reasons that multitasking is not something that most of us are any good at, and as I've suggested, tends to mean that we produce some sloppy work. It's because we're not designed to multitask to that extent, and we use up a lot of energy. The executive suite in the brain can get tired. And one of the areas of the brain that is implicated is Brodmann area 10. And it is suggested that that area is associated with something called cognitive branching, which essentially means that we need to go around different routes, but remember where we were when we branched out here, stop that task, come back, go across, remember where we stopped this other task, and then start that again, and then stop it at some point, and then go back to this other one here. And there may be quite a few branches. And as you can imagine, that can be quite taxing for all of us. So the reason that I think Professor Kramer is mentioned, or the article is structured in this way, is to upfront say when our attention is divided, when we get distracted, it is to a degree debilitating to us, because we get tired and we're not as efficient. And other studies have shown, this is not in the article, other studies have shown that when we are involved in a task and something interrupts us and we get taken away from it, let's say someone says, hey, the boss needs to see you now, then it can take us up to 20 minutes to get involved in that task again, to fully be present, particularly when it is something that requires that executive suite to be active. The same thing can happen in a meeting. We can get plucked out of a meeting, and then to get back into it again, once we come back, can take us up to 20 minutes, which is a long time if you're in a meeting. So distractions, generally, not quite multitasking in that sense, but it could be because we get distracted and then we get involved in this task, we get distracted again, we get involved in that task. And let's go further on in the article. So the article continues. Computer scientists and psychologists have been studying attention spans for about 20 years. They intended to study attention spans for 30, but they got distracted. Over which time? The 20 years. The average time that a person can focus on one thing has dropped from, wait for it, 2.5 minutes to 45 seconds in 20 years. 2.5 minutes to 45 seconds. That's a huge decrease. So I think this is, not only is it important, this concerns me, that the average time that a person can focus on something has reduced by such an amount. So Professor Kramer cites a number of reasons. First is the constant bombardment of information that we receive. And he mentions the news, that in the past we would watch the news in the morning and then maybe in the evening, and then that would be it. But because we've got access to these smart devices, of course, we can get it 24/7. And as many people have said, when you try and access all that, it's a little bit like trying to get a drink from a broken fire hydrant. It's like, wow, overpowering. And so we shouldn't be doing that, but sometimes we can get a bit silly and look at this stuff, 24/7 sometimes it would seem, and that's not good for us. So then we need to look at cars, according to Professor Kramer, to give us, he provides us with another example, suggesting, again, and this I think is to sort of crank up the background to this, suggesting that cars were safer in the past. They had radios. Now we've got sat-navs and infotainment. And later on in this article, he cites, I think, one of his, I presume, PhD students who says that infotainment is as dangerous as texting. So again, we've got this distraction message coming through in the article so far, and accessing news, which is there at our fingertips or on a screen. And that also got me thinking about things from the past. I found this phone, going to get it sent away, recycled, etc. An old Nokia, and it's a flip screen from the old days. Remember, this, if you had one of these, Kirk to Bridge or something like that. And it's ergonomically wonderful to hold. It's got a good weight to it, very robust, really long battery life. It has a camera and it has a screen and it has another screen inside and keyboard, so you could text, you could send, I think, videos, low res probably, and some photographs, and of course it could work as a phone. So a lot of the time I'd put this on speakerphone and have it out here and wander around and have a conversation in the days when we used to use these things as phones. And whilst smartphones can be magnificent and amazing devices, I think that for me that's part of the problem, and I think this is also what Professor Kramer in this article is alluding to. Part of the problem is that this made it difficult to do things on the internet, and clunky and slow, partly because of the system that we had then. Was it 3G or whatever? And now it's easy and it's literally at our fingertips. So we have temptation, we have responsibility, but we're also faced with the fact that we can just do this stuff. And yeah, there's the guy, David Strayer is the PhD student, a former PhD student, who said that texting and infotainment were on a par in terms of how dangerous they can be. And scientists have looked at multitasking, what networks are activated and overactivated. Again, this tiring out idea that we can become exhausted. And also, remember, when we become tired cognitively, that's when we make mistakes. Hence my remark about sloppiness. But that sloppiness, those mistakes, could be dangerous as well. So, let's move on. Again, I want to encourage you to read the article, so I'll move out bits and pieces. So let's head to things that can help. So mindfulness, it says here, is one popular method to switch off from stuff and indeed almost switch off for our own rush of thoughts and simply observe them. There are different types of mindfulness. Mindfulness meditation. Mindfulness could also mean just being fully present, being very much in the moment with this task or with this thing, which leads me to think also then about being in that state of flow when we are so engrossed in something that's difficult enough, challenging enough, but not too challenging that we can't do it. That when we are involved in this, let's say, creative thing, building something, maybe painting, maybe it's gardening, could be doing something which is related to sport as well. Whatever that is, when we get into that state of flow, our troubles, our fears, etc., they just melt away. And we're only focused on that thing. And when we're focused on that thing, that task, whatever we're doing, then of course we're not distracted because there's one thing. It may consist of various components, but that's it. That's our world. And we're generally, well, in fact, if we are in a state of flow, we're not accessing social media, devices, tablets, phones. And another thing that has been found to be effective to help us regain some attention is increasing cardiorespiratory fitness, which is interesting. And also other suggestions: take up a new instrument, learn a new language, continue to enhance our minds, and reducing stress and getting enough sleep. Again, great advice. And I think I'm a fan of paper books, recycled paper, because if it's daylight, you don't need power and you're not looking at a screen, and I think it's easier to read. You can annotate, you can stick notes on. If it's your thing, you can write in the book as well. And I find that I am immersed in that area, whether it is non-fiction or fiction, in a different way than I am when I'm looking at a screen. And some studies suggest that if you're in a lecture, let's say, and you're typing things out verbatim, you have a different understanding of that lecture as opposed to the individual who's writing notes, because unless you have shorthand and a pretty good working memory and buffer, then you're likely to have to paraphrase, maybe doodle, maybe draw, maybe write down keywords. And the idea is that because we go through one level of processing already to do that, we begin to get deeper in terms of our understanding. And I think for me, this is the issue. It is ultimately the distractions that are there at our fingertips that we're encouraged to focus on. But there are so many things that want our attention that it's like a constant grab. We have to take responsibility for this, and we have to upfront understand that we're in many ways, either you could call us the product or the input, the raw material for the product. It's our attention, and that attention towards adverts, that attention to feeling the need to be on this particular platform or in this particular group. And whilst that can do us good, of course, like all things, moderation is required. And there is an addictive quality to certain platforms and certain apps. And the people behind those platforms know that. And they are designed to be addictive, to hook all of us in and to keep us there, to not want us to stray. Despite the messages they make up and say, hey, a lot of screen time, go and take a break, with a really intriguing video to tell you to take a break. That was a good video. I better scroll on because there'll be something else which will give me that hit. And I'm anticipating another marvellous bit of infotainment in a moment. And they're habitually addictive. They are also addictive in terms of things like dopamine, indeed serotonin, and to a degree epinephrine, one could argue. And I think this responsibility is something that if we are not careful, we are going to dumb ourselves down big style. It's the difference between reading that book. Again, my preference is paper, but the difference between that and Googling something and getting a surface skim, or using Chat GPT or these other AI systems. In this article, Professor Kramer mentions that a lot of the young kids don't know how to drive anything but stick. American article, meaning, of course, manual transmission. And that's easier to learn, I think. I mean, I've driven automatics. I think they're easier to learn. Manual transmission takes more time, and you've kind of got to think about it potentially more. He's not really making the point about driving, of course. What he's saying, I think, my interpretation, reading between the lines, is he's saying we want things to be so easy that we're giving our power away. We're allowing our attention to be grabbed, and our understanding of how things work to possibly be diminished. If you've ever decided to study something, like a language, or to learn something new, maybe the guitar, or study something at college or online, whatever it is, you've probably found yourself going, oh, this takes time. It takes practice. I've got to think about this. I've got to make mistakes. I've got to go away again and then find that, oh, maybe I hadn't retained as much as I thought that I had, and start again. And you've got to learn perseverance and keep it on going. And failing is really learning. Then once we understand that, there is a great enjoyment involved in it and a great sense of accomplishment. And I would strongly suggest that our knowledge of whatever it is very different if we have really spent time understanding something. It's deeper, it's more profound. I'm not saying that there isn't a place for looking around at things and surface skimming and saying, oh, I've got a bit of an understanding about that, and that. So I sort of get on, I can grasp the big picture, which I need to do quite quickly, as can sometimes happen. It's not that that's bad. It's that if that's what we're doing all the time, and if you've used things like Chat GPT and you've asked it about a subject that you know something about, you will also know that it's sometimes not that accurate. It's sometimes wrong. It apparently sometimes gives the wrong information entirely. No doubt they'll improve on that, but how do we know? And why should we allow a machine, an algorithm, a program, a device to tell us, to inform us? I think it may be helpful in many different ways, but I strongly believe we have to retain, not everything, our own ability to understand in depth certain things. And crucially, above all, to be able to think critically about things. But if all we do is grab that bit of info and look over there, and we tire ourselves out, and it's gone from 2.5 minutes to 45 seconds in only 20 years, then where will it plunge to?